Vaccines appear to be a major problem for the Trudeau Liberals this week, or lack thereof. Political reporter Brian Lilley joins me now to talk more about it. Brian, the feds attempted to spin the announcement that vials of Pfizer vaccine were 6 doses instead of 5 as a good news story, but you say this is actually bad news.
Yeah, because we're not getting any extra doses. We're not going to get suddenly an extra 20% of doses. What we're getting is a reduced number of vials. So each vial, and the little tiny medicine bottle, and they put the syringe in, they pull it out. We've all seen it on TV. Pfizer had those approved as containing 5 doses. Now, anytime I'm told a pharmaceutical manufacturer makes something like that, they always put a little bit more in because the way the needles work and the fact that the liquid will stick to the bottle and to the needle, there's a bit that you can't draw out. Well, skilled technicians started using dead space needles that don't waste as much, and were able to get 6 doses out. So Pfizer said, oh, well, if you're getting 6 doses, we're going to relabel the bottle. Now, they had to ask for Health Canada approval to do that in Canada, and they've had to do that with regulators around the world. Health Canada said yes. The problem is a number of provinces say, look, this is not a sure thing, that quite often we can't get the 6 dose. I know that Dr. Dina Hinshaw in Alberta has said it's about 50% of the time. Now, with the right needle and a skilled technician, it improves, but still only 75% of the time. So we will still be getting the 4 million doses of Pfizer, but it'll be fewer vials because they're now counting each vial as 6. Not every province, not every health unit will be able to get 6 doses out of every bottle. So this is a really bad news story for Canada when it comes to vaccines, at a time when we've got a lot of bad news stories when it comes to vaccines.
Now, apparently, there are also some issues as well with Canada getting the vaccines that we ordered, Brian. Have there been some issues maybe with the delivery? Should we maybe use DoorDash or skip the dishes, perhaps?
They might be quicker, but the problem is not the delivery company. Some of the best delivery companies in the world working on this file, but the doses just aren't there. And so you'll recall it was, I guess, 2 weeks ago now that we had 0 doses for the entire country of the Pfizer vaccine. Last week we had 79,000 for the whole country, and this week we'll get 70,000 doses for the entire country. Next week that's supposed to pick up. And while they were talking about 360,000 doses, they're now saying, no, it will be, and they're counting the new 6 dose and saying it'll be more. But we're still having trouble with Moderna. Moderna reduced us by 50,000 doses last week. For the week of February 22nd, when their next batch is supposed to arrive, they can't tell us how many we'll get or if the delivery will be on time. So these problems persist. The government puts out a planning document that they share with the provinces on a regular basis. And last week, they removed all scheduled deliveries for the month of March.
Now, Brian, you recently wrote about how Britain is so far ahead of Canada in vaccinating its population against COVID-19, and it was partly due to Oxford's AstraZeneca's vaccine. Now, how did Britain become a leader, and why are we not using that vaccine?
Well, they helped develop it. It was developed at the University of Oxford in partnership with pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca, and they approved it. We have still yet to approve the AstraZeneca vaccine. We've agreed to take it from COVAX, that international system that we thought was supposed to be about helping developing countries get vaccines. So we're going to take it from there, but we haven't approved it. In Britain, they took a very different approach to fighting COVID-19. Now, in some things, I'll admit, I've heard from a lot of readers, yeah, but they failed on this. I'm talking about vaccines now. Back on May 16th, the same day that Justin Trudeau first spoke about the deal with CanSino, the Chinese firm, on that same day, Britain announced that they were building a permanent vaccination, manufacturing, and innovation center. That will open this coming summer. But they also announced more than $60 million for a temporary vaccine manufacturing facility. They took an old building, they retrofitted it, and they are ready to produce vaccines. They put money behind AstraZeneca and Oxford. That vaccine is now being made at a therapeutics firm. It's not a vaccine manufacturing firm, and it's being bottled at another place. Our government said, our facilities don't work, we can't do it. They didn't start asking vaccine manufacturers to manufacture here until August and September. And at that point, it was just too late. So the UK took a let's get the best of Britain together and do this, and took a can-do attitude. We took a can't-do attitude, and now it's hurting us because we could be manufacturing a vaccine like AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson on Canadian soil if we had done it properly.
Now, we know the Europeans have export controls in place and could cut us off at any time. But what about the United States? They're making vaccines there. Have the Trudeau Liberals sought to get supplies from the Americans?
Well, they're not saying, but there are readouts of calls. And of course, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was the first foreign leader that Joe Biden called after his inauguration. The readout from the White House doesn't mention vaccines, but the readout from Justin Trudeau's office, from the PMO, does say that he and the American president discussed vaccines. Then there was a call between Trudeau and U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris, and they discussed access to vaccines. So what it looks like happened is perhaps they've asked and been turned down, and they don't want to discuss that. So the Americans are not discussing vaccines. They are saying, look, we want the global population to be healthy, but we're vaccinating our people first. And so there's a Pfizer plant in Kalamazoo, Michigan. It's about 200 kilometers from the border between Windsor and Detroit. You know, you could send a truck down there and get all kinds of doses. And the Americans, quite frankly, wouldn't miss those or Moderna doses because they've distributed more than 60 million vaccine doses at this point and vaccinated more than 40 million people. But, you know, they're still producing them faster than they can use them. So we could take a couple days supply and they wouldn't notice, and it would do Canada a world of good. But the Biden administration has an America First policy, just like the Trump administration did. So for all those people that said, oh, it'll be so much better once we get rid of that bad orange man, well, here's news for you. The new guy is a lot like the old guy on this, and we're being left out in the cold.
So, Brian, what about the Made in Canada solution when it comes to vaccines, the one coming out of Montreal? The Canadian-made vaccine, what's the latest?
Well, that's an American firm that's going to come here and produce at a facility in Montreal. Now, when Prime Minister Trudeau first announced this, he made it sound like it was going to be something that would happen in the summer. And, you know, that was the teaser ahead of his announcement. Then at his announcement, he said, well, I think the fall it'll be ready. Then his foreign minister, his industry minister, Francois-Philippe Champagne, said, well, actually, December. And then the National Research Council, this is all the same day, Hal, the National Research Council came out and said, well, we hope to have engineering on the building done by December and production will take place after that. So it'll be 2022 before we get that vaccine going. It's not going to help us for dealing with what we've got going right now, which is a lack of vaccines and a definite need, especially to get our most vulnerable vaccinated. You know, once that happens, we can start returning to normal in a much quicker way, but we need those doses.
Now, we heard the announcement a couple of weeks ago that Canadians landing at the 4 airports taking international flights would have to get tested when they land and then they'd stay at a hotel at their own expense. Now, that's not actually set up yet, but we keep hearing stories from Calgary and Toronto of people being forced to stay in hotels. Why is that?
Well, that's because they're coming in with the wrong test. So there are already places set up for people who do not have proof that they had a negative PCR test. And so I know my colleagues at the Calgary Sun have been writing about what happened with, I believe it was a pastor and his wife and some other people. And
yeah, the Mathis family, that's right, yeah.
Yes.
Chris and Nicole Mathis, that's correct, yeah. Yeah, she had the antigen test, right? Yeah, instead of the PCR.
Same thing here in Toronto. Joe Warmington in the Toronto Sun had a story of a guy who he landed, thought he had a COVID test. He did, but it was an antigen test. Most of us would not know the difference if it bit us in the behind. But, you know, I know the difference because I'm immersed in this daily. But the average person, are they really getting the right information? Is the government clear enough? It must be a PCR test. And so these people are landing, they present the paperwork and they say, but that's not good enough. You need a PCR test. You're going in that hotel. Now, my understanding is that right now they're not getting the $2,000 hotel bill that the feds have promised will be coming. So they're not having to pay for it, but you are not allowed to leave. There are security guards everywhere. You don't get to choose the food you eat. They just drop some food off. It's it's not exactly what a lot of people would be expecting. It's been quite the shock to anybody whose story I've heard.
Brian, since long-term care facilities were some of the hardest hit during the COVID-19 pandemic, there have been calls for national standards, but that is something that Conservative leader Aaron O'Toole really opposes. Why is that?
He opposes it because he said this is provincial jurisdiction and that an Ottawa knows best approach just won't work. And quite frankly, I think he's right. Um, Look, one of the reasons that our long-term care facilities have been the hardest hit is because this is a virus that hits elderly people with underlying conditions the hardest. Who lives in long-term care facilities? People who are in their later years who have health problems. You don't go to long-term care because you're a shining example of health. You go because you need that additional level of medical treatment on a daily basis. This vaccine is deadly for people in that condition. The fact that we didn't have more people die in the general population outside of long-term care is a testament to the fact that Canada generally handled COVID-19 well, comparatively speaking to other countries. Long-term care is the exception because they're prone to it. But the feds have said they want to come in with a couple $1 billion to solve all the problems, but you've got to take national standards. The premiers say, well, wait a minute. You're not funding the healthcare system that we've got already. You're not funding that properly. You won't pay your full bill on that. What makes you think you can come in and take over another section of our jurisdiction, just throw some money at it, and then impose standards and walk away? There have to be fixes in long-term care. I know here in Ontario, some of the regulations have not been updated since 1972 when I was 1 year old. I think maybe things have changed in the world of air conditioning and HVAC and air filtration since that time. In fact, we didn't have air conditioning. Most of us didn't have it back then. Some of these homes didn't have it. We've got to make fixes, but having the federal government and a bureaucrat in Ottawa tell every long-term care facility across the country how they should operate, that's not the solution.
The Canadian Embassy in China issued an apology for what was deemed an offensive T-shirt. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I've seen this design online over the last year, and I don't know if you have. It's the design of the logo of the hip hop group Wu-Tang Clan. And instead of Wu-Tang, it says Wuhan. Now, the logo for Wu-Tang Clan kind of looks like a bat anyway. And so that just adds to what I think is a pretty clever, hilarious little T-shirt. But some staff members working in the diplomatic section in China for the government of Canada ordered some of these T-shirts. Well, that became a story in Chinese state media. The Chinese government expressed outrage. How dare you? Um, you know, my response to them would not have been an apology. Let's put it this way. They are kidnapping dictators. I'm not going to apologize to them. Unfortunately, that's not the direction the Trudeau government took. They decided to issue an apology. After the apology, People's Daily in China, the government-owned newspaper, tweeted out a comment from the foreign ministry saying Canada should take this as a lesson and make sure this never happens again. They weren't even gracious in the face of an apology. They can go pound sand next time, as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Brian, speaking of China, Canada's top spy reports that China remains a serious threat to Canada since the Asian nation is determined to steal secrets and intimidate opponents.
And you know what? While our embassy was apologizing for a T-shirt, the Chinese embassy in Ottawa was issuing a threat to Canadian media outlets saying, don't give voice to people who support Taiwan or democracy activists in Hong Kong. Yeah, they try and intimidate absolutely everybody who goes against the kidnapping dictators in Beijing. You are not allowed to speak out against them, especially if you're a Chinese citizen or Chinese national who's moved here and still has family back there. They will intimidate you here, they will intimidate your family back home and try and make sure that you are not spreading messages that they don't like. At the same time, China has long been a horrible industrial spy in this country. There is a great deal of excellent evidence that the fall of Nortel is a direct result of China stealing secrets from that once great Canadian tech giant. Um, I don't think it's outrageous to say that Nortel's demise and Huawei's rise on some of the same technology is not a coincidence. There has been reports from Bloomberg, Reuters, and other great reporting in the business press on this over the years. But that's not the only company that they do it to. They will steal any sort of intelligence they can to build their economy and hurt ours. And Canadians need to remember that. I think too often we forget.
Political reporter and Toronto Sun columnist Brian Lilley, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Hal.